This module has discussed the nuts and bolts of government accounts, the nitty-gritty of fiscal policy, the fiscal stances in any far from equilibrium situations, multiplier and crowding effect, lags and delays in fiscal policy and effects of changing marginal tax rates on as and the Laffer curve. To start with, the government budget was discussed. It is composed of two broad streams, government expenditures and tax revenues. Government expenditures include government purchases and government transfer payments. The bulk of government spending goes in programs like national defense, social security, basic education, basic infrastructure, basic health care, and of course, in handling recessions. Government tax revenues. The government imposes taxes and fees that generate revenue. The bulk of government tax revenues comes from two taxes: the individual and household income tax, the corporate or firm's income tax. Then, the budget deficit, surplus or balance were discussed. If government expenditures are greater than tax revenues, the government is said to be running a budget deficit. If tax revenues are greater than government expenditures, the government runs a budget surplus. If government expenditures equal tax revenues, the government runs a balanced budget. The public debt, which is sometimes called the government or national debt, is the total amount the government owes its creditors. Then, the broad fiscal policy stances were discussed. Expansionary fiscal policy consists of increases in government expenditures and/or decreases in taxes to achieve macroeconomic goals focused towards moving the economy from recessionary gap to its natural equilibrium. Contractionary fiscal policy is implemented through decreases in government expenditures and/or increases in taxes to achieve goals focused towards moving the economy from inflationary gap to its natural equilibrium. Recessionary gap. Expansionary fiscal policy. Government expenditures increases and/or taxes decreases. Inflationary gap. Contractionary fiscal policy. Government expenditures decreases and/or taxes increases. Expansionary fiscal policy. Recessionary gap. Expansionary fiscal policy. Government expenditures increases and/or taxes decreases. Government purchases increases. Consumption increases. Investment increases. Rightward shift in aggregate demand. Contractionary fiscal policy. Inflationary gap. Contractionary fiscal policy. Government expenditures decreases and/or taxes increases. Government purchases decreases. Consumption decreases. Investment decreases. Leftward shift in aggregate demand. Then, the multiplier effect was discussed. If G increases, the GDP would increase more than just G if taxes remain unaltered. This is because the bust in spending by G would lead both consumption and investment to rise, which in turn would lead to a greater increase in national income, or GDP, than the original increase in government spending. This was termed as multiplier effect by Keynes. Change in GDP, change in deficit spending by government multiplied with income multiplier, where the income multiplier is 1 divided by proportional leakage from the income expenditure cycle. Then, the crowding out effect was discussed. Crowding out is a decrease in private expenditures that is, consumption, investment, etc., as a consequence of increased government spending or the financing needs of a budget deficit. Then, the typical lags in fiscal policy initiation in the economy were discussed. The data lag. Policymakers are not aware of changes in the economy as soon as they happen. The wait-and-see lag. After policymakers are aware of a downturn in economic activity, they usually adopt a relatively cautious wait-and-see attitude. They want to be sure that the observed events are not just short-run phenomena. The legislative lag, even after policymakers decide that some type of fiscal policy measure is required. Congress or the Prime Minister has to propose the measure, build political support for it, and get it passed. The legislative lag can take many months. The transmission lag. After enacted, a fiscal policy measure takes time to go into effect. For example, an expansionary fiscal policy measure mandating increased spending for public works projects requires construction companies to submit bids for the work, prepare designs, negotiate contracts, and so on. The effectiveness lag. After a policy measure is actually implemented, it takes time to affect the economy. The effects of marginal taxes changes in the supply side of economy were then taken up. Recessionary gap, deduction in tax rates, households and firms are more motivated for work, more output produced in the economy, aggregate supply shift rightwards, restores equilibrium. The Laffer curve was then discussed in details. This debated about government policies around tax regime and their impact on the government tax revenues. Tax revenues is equal to tax base multiplied with average tax rate. Obviously, whether tax revenues increase or decrease as the average tax rate is lowered depends on whether the tax base expands by a greater or lesser percentage than the percentage reduction in the tax rate. Any change in tax rate has a direct impact on the tax base, and consequently, the impact on the tax revenues is derived from the multiplication of the two variables. Two cases were discussed where a change in tax rate changed the tax base, and hence the tax revenues changed. Finally, Laffer curve was